All right. As we finish up this first reading of the Renaissance, whereas we're looking at the lecture, The Making of Renaissance Society, we're now going to look at the family and sexual patterns of the Renaissance. The significant changes in family development really is going to mark changes. The first thing we see here is the family. For the most part, family is going to be the extended family. The extended family is going to be parents, children, servants, grandparents, uncles, etc. We'll talk a little bit about that. Even in the urban areas, they may be evolving a little bit, but really that type of family, that family pattern is going to continue to be a continuity from the Middle Ages. We see this concept of arranged marriages. Arranged marriages, especially in the second estate and the upper third estate, they become a norm. These arranged marriages, it's really not about what the children want in their marriage, it's about what the family will get out of the marriage. In marriages, I want to point out this is a really important element. Women had no value when it came to marriage. Yes, they're going to be vessels to give birth to their children. That's important. But other than that, and we know the evidence I give you here is that dowry. Dowry was the amount of money a woman's family had to put together so that she could be of value. So I always teach this as an example. My first child was a daughter. I was excited in 2001 when my daughter was born. Well, if I was 200 years, 300 years earlier, if my daughter was born, I would not have been excited. I knew the rest of my life I would have to earn a dowry so that she could be married, so that she would not become a burden on her family. So that dowry is really important. Without a dowry, these women possibly would not get married, become maybe old maids, maybe they become nuns, but women, very important. I want to point out husband and father was the center of the family. This is going to be what I call the quote-unquote patriarchy. If you like feminist studies, the patriarchy is really established. Machismo or manliness became really a definitive element of these family eras. I hope you guys notice that there's typically a 13-year age difference between husband and wife, where women would get married at between, what did the textbook say, 16 to 18. That means men did not marry until 29 to their 30s. This is a distinct change from the medieval era, as now all of a sudden the men had to prove that they were quote-unquote breadwinners. And this is why they're going to be marrying late. And that's a really important element, especially when we look at family patterns, because we know puberty hits men in their teenage years. And those teenage years, that increased testosterone is really going to drive them for sexual outlets. So we'll talk about that in a hot second, though. Social change with children. I do want to point out that women were responsible for both childbearing. Of course, childbearing means to give birth, but also child rearing. Child rearing means to raise your children. That was their primary role in the family, especially when we look at the nobility and the townspeople. Now, peasants, different, but this new modern family. Childbearing was very dangerous. But if you notice, do you see that Gregorio Dotti, 3 of his 4 wives died during childbirth. There might be a sense of excitement about birth, but it was mainly followed by dread, knowing that death was imminent. Now, with that said, let's look a little bit about the sexual norms. I like the word mores here. That's a better word, sexual mores. It looks like mores, but it's mores. We're going to talk about sexual norms. That's what the textbook says. But if you ever hear somebody talk about sexual mores, that is what it means. I hope you notice in marriage, men were almost expected to have affairs. Men were expected to have premarital sex. Men were meant to be experiment. They were the ones defining the laws. Men were like, hey, I should have the ability to be adventurous. But when it came to women, the men controlled. And you notice in the textbook that Dr. Pavlova pointed out, women were executed for affairs. Women who, if they were thought of that they may have had premarital sex, they were no longer worthy to be married. So I want to point out all this, we begin to see this gender change. And this is a very definitive change from the Middle Ages. Later marriages for men really gave rise to these need for sexual outlets. Because again, women were supposed to be innocent. They're supposed to be pure. Well, how do the men get experience? Well, this allows them where local governments begin to regulate prostitution. Prostitution was regulated. And I hope you notice one of my probably my favorite things in this textbook is just that weird thing. The idea that prostitutes, they would have gloves on their hand and a bell on their head, almost like the ice cream truck, right? You would know when the prostitutes are around, that it was meant for you to go. Young men just seek them out. And again, a little fun factor if you don't know, prostitutes were probably the cleanest people of the age. They were the ones that bathed the most because of their sexual activity. So there's a couple things there. If you wanted to know, you can definitely do a more deeper dive. But here is, and again, we see Dr. Spavola saying a lot of things. I always like to show you a primary source to help you understand that this actually is doing. This is a little bit outside of our time frame. I'm primarily looking at the 14 and 1500s, but the late 1500s. This is an image of the quote unquote public whore. Now, this was 1598, and in this sense, it appears that the public whore or prostitute in her little area, it was more about having a flag to identify that she's a prostitute. But again, we always want to have primary sources to help cement our understanding. And again, when we look at the conclusion here, we see this making of the sexual changes. Despite the estates staying the same, there is some changes, especially in the urban areas. So let's look at this. Despite significant continuities from the medieval era, want to make sure there was probably for me the biggest continuity is the estate system. The nobles still had special privileges. That's so important. But outside of that, the Renaissance society did have became distinct with economic, social, and familial changes. So again, really important there. So definitely look that up. Now, before I leave here, I just want to ask you, there are obviously rhetorical questions before on video, but in class we're going to pause and have more conversation. But what part of the Renaissance society did you think was the most important? What was a big change? But also, which part was the most surprising? Was the most surprising was that 85 to 90% of the population didn't participate in the Renaissance? Is that the most surprising? Or is it most surprising that prostitutes were allowed? Or was that the funniest with the bells? I don't know. But that's one of the things, as in our classes, we ponder through. We want to make sure that we pause and challenge our understandings. But with that said, I hope you're ready for the quiz tomorrow. Have a great day.